Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Katie Day. I am the Assistant Director at Family Promise. I oversee and support the program client-facing side of our work, and our wonderful case managers who I get to work with regularly. So thank you all for being here tonight. A special thank you to Second Congregational Church for your amazing hospitality, for opening your doors here tonight, turning your heat on for us to be here tonight, which I heard takes 3 hours just to get it up and running. Thank you to all 4 of our panelists for being here, and you'll get a more proper introduction briefly. And thank you for everyone who is in the seats here tonight to be a part of what we hope is an ongoing conversation about the real life stuff that is going on with families, neighbors in our community when it comes to just being able to keep a roof over their head and a safe place to live or find one after they've lost one. A lot about family homelessness is invisible. We don't see it. It's very well hidden. But on the ground, our case managers and the families, obviously, who are going through it, see it on a regular basis, and we've really been wanting to figure out how can we communicate this and engage with the community so that we can all see it, and then we can all create spaces and places where everybody gets a home. And so I'm going to start out with a story just to provide some framework for the rest of the discussion. It's 3 pages long, but I'm going to go as fast as possible because I was like, it's so complicated. But it's very representative of why this was the topic that we chose to start this series of conversations off with. It's not about just this one family. This is about many families, but this family story kind of like encapsulates the whole reason we're talking about this. So, in this particular family, we started working with them maybe a year and a half ago, and particularly heartbreaking for me, just like some of those cases that you see that like really like worm their way in, because I don't live in Beverly, I live in another North Shore town, and this family, a single mom and a child, their daughter went to middle school with my daughter. So you could like open up the yearbook and like, there's my daughter's picture and there's their daughter's picture, and it's not a happy ending. And I will probably think about this family every day for the rest of my life, despite the fact that we tried everything. It didn't end well, and it didn't end well because the system failed them. And so this was a family. They were living in a market rate apartment. Market rate is just like your regular apartment that you pay regular money for. And right now, the going rates for like a 2-bedroom, we're talking like $24,000, $28,000, $3,000. It's a crazy amount of money. This mom, she has a disability that when it flares up, she cannot work. And when you lose your income suddenly and you're in a market rate apartment, you can accrue those arrears so fast. And you can see an eviction come at you so fast. Before you can even figure out how to access help or where to go for help, you're already so far along, there's no going back, right? So this particular family, by the time they came to us, had the eviction it was happening. There was no way to go back. And she didn't have a lot of family support. She didn't have a lot of community support. Nobody really in her life knew that this was happening because she just wanted to keep things like as normal as possible for her daughter. But amazingly, she's an amazing advocate for herself and her child. And she, in the eviction process, without support from legal aid or anything, I don't think she was able to access that because she didn't know how at the time. She was able to negotiate a settlement with her, or a judgment with her landlord, that if she left by a certain day, all the arrears that she owed would be forgiven, and they would be able to file what's called a satisfaction of judgment in housing court, and that basically means even if you've accrued arrears, that you and the landlord agreed on some certain terms, you did everything you could to meet those terms, and you left on good terms, in good standing with your landlord, and it is not supposed to be held against you in the future when you go to look for other housing, but it is. So she's in the middle of becoming homeless. She had nowhere to go. She left on the date that was agreed upon so she could get the satisfaction of judgment so that this eviction wouldn't be hanging over her head for forever. They did not have a permanent place to go. They were like, we'll figure it out, but we need to leave on good terms with this landlord so we have a chance. So they left. And while all of this was going on, while she had lost her job, they're getting evicted, she came up on one of the housing lotteries for the new multi-income MBTA Community Act buildings that was going up in town. She got local preference, so she was selected at the top of the list, and partially because she was a resident of the town that the building was going up in. And it was a for-profit developer, so not one of our community action programs. So she submitted all of the paperwork on time. She showed up for her interview. Meanwhile, like, she's looking for a job. She doesn't have a car. She is, dealing with these medical issues, but she did everything she was supposed to do. She provided all of her paperwork, and her interview with the property management went great. She left there feeling like, I have this apartment was for a subsidy, and you'll hear in a little bit about what is the difference between affordable housing and subsidized housing. This was for people or households who earn less than 30% AMI or area median income for the region. And it was for an income-based subsidy, which means that they would pay a third of their income, and if their income changes, their rent portion changes. And at the time she applied for this housing, she had no income, so she was under the 30% AMI. And so she qualified. At the time of application, everything on paper was qualified. She had the satisfaction of judgment, and they said, okay, we'll be in touch in a week or two. And she thought she just needed to hold herself and her daughter over for a few months until the apartment became available. She's ready to go. And then a week goes by, she doesn't hear anything. 2 weeks goes by, she doesn't hear anything. And she's calling them every day. She's showing up at the office, but they don't have office hours. So when she can get there, there's nobody there. She's sending emails, no one's responding. She finally reached out to us. We tried to contact the property management company to figure out what's going on. And then it was maybe like 3 or 4 weeks later, she gets something in the mail, backdated a month to the day of her application, that says, you're denied because you have an eviction. And she was like, but I gave you the paper, like I showed you the paper that says we're good, right? And so she tried to contact them. She put it in the mail immediately again so they would have it, tried to follow up. No one. Weeks went by. Nobody responded to her to provide clarity on what was going on. And so we found a contact who knew the vice president of so-and-so at this developer, and we reached out to them to try to appeal. And they said, okay, we'll take this into consideration, but can you answer 2 questions? One, is this person still a resident of the town? And 2, do they still meet the income guidelines for the 30% AMI? They, being homeless, legally still can count that town as their local preference residency, so yes, no problem. But with all of this going on, Mom got a full-time job. She negotiated her salary up from $18 an hour to $22 an hour. Woo, everyone's happy, exciting. Guess what? She's now like $3,000 over income for the 30% AMI units. So we're like, it's not the end of the road. We can figure something out. So we're like, the next unit is 60% AMI. That's like a fixed rate you pay, it's like about $2,200, but it doesn't change based on income, but it is for people who make approximately 60% of the area median income. For a household of two, that's, I think, like $79,000. So we're talking a difference of $39,000 to $79,000 for household income. And there was no way, we were like, we can put money together to try to hold her over if she can get in, and then maybe she can increase her income. But with that different, like there was just no way any of us could put that much money together to try to make this work, nor would the property management allow something like that, which sort of makes sense. But then, it's not funny, I don't know why I'm laughing, it's just crazy, that's why. So then what we say, okay, is there a way, she just started this job, like we're like 2 weeks in, maybe doesn't even have her first pay stub yet. You can go and renegotiate with your employer to either go back to your original salary, which you did such a good job, you know, trying to think you were doing the right thing, or just go down a few hours, right, until you can like qualify, you get in, and then we can figure things out from there as you go. And she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to do it because her employer didn't know what was going on. She wanted to make a good impression. And like she'd done a really good thing for herself and her child. And finally, when we realized going up to 60% wasn't going to work, we said to this vice president of such and community something, I don't even know, whatever. But we went back to that person and we said, okay, here's the deal. She's barely over. She has a disability that her income is, there's no guarantee that this is going to be stable forever. And also, like, we gave you all the documents at the time that she applied and she qualified, like she had everything there, and then she was ignored for weeks and weeks and weeks. And their response was, we checked with the lawyers. If she reduces her income to get housing, that is fraud. Also, the appeal period was 14 days after the denial, and we are weeks out after that, so we really can't be having this conversation anymore. Remember, she tried to contact them for weeks and weeks and weeks? Yep. So no accountability on their part. And then he said, can't you just go apply to another 50% AMI unit, which is like the lower bracket? Those barely exist, okay? This guy, vice president leadership of this developer making affordable housing, the fact that dead serious could be like, well, can't you just find something else? No, dude, there's not enough housing. Like, this is wild, right? And this family is still homeless. Their child had to leave school where she had been succeeding. We are still working with her to try to figure out options, but this was such a clear situation of everyone doing the right thing. The system not taking accountability for the ways that it failed this person by not doing paperwork or responding to an email or a phone call, accusing her of fraud, and then being like, you can just find something else, it's okay. Like, so we were like, we need to talk about affordable housing and why people just can't get it, right? Like, so that's what you are all here for, and that was supposed to be a 5-minute story that turned into a 15-minute story, but that's why we're here. And I'm gonna turn it over to Rachel, our executive director and moderator, for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Katie. I told her she could speak for as long as she wanted, as long as it was interesting, and I was engaged, so I'd say you accomplished that. I want to just start quickly by noting that the exits are clearly marked, but hopefully if you came in through the maze, there is a faster exit to the outside should there be an emergency, right through that vestibule to the right. And then bathrooms, if you go right through that door and to the left, there's a staircase that goes down and the bathrooms are on the lower level. There is an elevator if you need that, and Adam, our pastor here at SEC, knows how to work it, so if you have questions, but wanted to start there. Thank you all so much for being here. We are so excited to host this panel, and we are really excited to have such an incredibly talented and compassionate group of people to speak to you tonight. We chose these panelists. This is our first time doing something like this, and the reason we wanted to do it is because we feel as an organization, we're small and we have a lot going on and we know a lot of really incredible people, and we felt like this was an opportunity for us to kind of showcase them and do a panel about a topic that we're really passionate about, and hopefully show the community what it is that we're doing and why it's important. So I'm going to intro the panelists because they're really important pillars of the community, and I have written bios for them about mostly in relation to how we interact with them, because I think what they do is what makes our work possible. And so I'm just going to kind of read through that, and then I'm going to start the whole process of asking questions and them answering it. So first we have, and I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is it Pabon? Pabon. Okay. Nicholas Pabon. He's a staff attorney from Northeast Legal Aid. Nicholas and his team at NLA, as well as a handful of other legal aid teams throughout the state, have been instrumental in helping so many of the families we serve get out of impossible legal situations as it relates to their housing. So often the folks we serve are not afforded the same rights and common courtesies as most people in this room, and the injustices we see on a daily basis when it comes to housing is a longer list than anyone could guess. Legal aid is where our team turns when we need to clarify a law, ensure that our families are getting fair treatment, and just in general when a case is beyond our staff's expertise. Nicholas has been an incredible resource for our team and has spent hours helping us understand complex new laws so we can better serve our clients. And through his work with the Lawyer for the Day program each week, he has helped countless families access the legal services they need to combat impossible housing cases by informing them of their legal rights as tenants in Massachusetts. Without legal assistance, many of these families would unjustly lose their homes or remain homeless for years to come. So if you don't know much about legal aid agencies, I highly recommend that you look into them because they are a pivotal part of the community and their lawyers are not paid enough. They could be doing very different forms of law and making a lot more money. Kelly Turley has been an advocate with and for people experiencing homelessness and poverty since 1997. She joined the staff of the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless in 2002 and has served as the associate director since 2017. In her role at the coalition, Kelly convenes and collaborates with stakeholders across the state to develop public policy strategies that expand access to homelessness prevention resources, safety net benefits, and affordable housing opportunities for families with children, unaccompanied youth, and adults. Her work centers on increasing equity, dignity, and opportunity within state-funded housing and cash assistance programs, and on upholding the human right to housing. From my perspective, as a provider, Kelly and the coalition have been indispensable partners throughout my career. They are consistently on the front lines of statewide policy and advocacy, keeping organizations like ours informed, equipped, and prepared to respond to changing laws and systems. Their research, resources, and guidance have shaped much of the work happening in our field, and Kelly is often the person we turn to when we need clarity on how a policy will impact the families we serve. Her compassion, expertise, and willingness to help make her an exceptional advocate and an invaluable partner. We are incredibly fortunate to have Kelly with us this evening, and even more fortunate to have her fighting every single day for the dignity and rights of marginalized families across Massachusetts. Anna Morneau, I put these in the exact order that you guys sat down, which is really cool. Anna Morneau is the senior property manager at Goldberg Properties, based here in Beverly. Our team first connected with Goldberg Properties in 2020 when they offered to provide us shelter space during the pandemic. Since then, they have continued partnering with us to house multiple families in their Beverly units, and working with Anna has truly been one of the greatest pleasures of this work. In a field where we so often are at odds with landlords, as Katie highlighted, fighting for our clients' right to simply be given a chance, Anna and her team have been a breath of fresh air. They have trusted us with some of our most complex cases, collaborated with us through layers of bureaucracy, and stuck with the process even when government-subsidized leasing created unnecessary chaos and delays. They have even joined us on Zoom calls to advocate for families who deserved housing when state agencies seemed intent on putting up barriers. We are grateful to have Anna joining us tonight. In any honest conversation about homelessness and affordable housing, the perspective of a landlord is essential, and we could not ask for a more thoughtful and committed partner. And lastly, Rachel Brown. She joined Family Promise as a case manager this past January, but it feels like we've known her for like 3 decades, which is like my whole life. But she came to us after 2 years working as a case manager, following a long career in the apparel and design industry. Very different. From day one, it was clear that Rachel was not only highly skilled, but that she embodies what it means to be an advocate in every aspect of her life. When she isn't working directly with families, she is reading every book, article, and resource she can find on homelessness, poverty, and social injustice. It's true, and I often ask her how she manages, because I just zone out on reality television after work. She is involved in numerous advocacy groups throughout Beverly and the North Shore, and she jokes that she's making up for lost time from her corporate years. But to our team, it's obvious she was meant for this work. Rachel's compassion and upbeat spirit can brighten anyone's day, and her attentiveness and genuine care help families trust her almost instantly. In my opinion, the sign of a great case manager is someone who can earn the trust of a stranger within minutes, and Rachel does that with ease. The work we do is difficult, and the families we serve often come to us in moments of deep vulnerability. Navigating those complex, traumatic situations requires patience, sensitivity, and the ability to truly listen. And Rachel brings all of that to her work every single day. We're incredibly lucky to have her on our team, and I know her perspective tonight will offer invaluable insights into the real struggles and barriers that families face in Massachusetts. So, now that you are intimately familiar with them, I think it's important to know where they're coming from and who they are as humans, because, and now there's like no pressure answering these questions. Like, it's totally fine. So I'm gonna kind of go through this. We'll ask all these questions. Don't feel like you have to have like a time limit. I have questions assigned to each of you. But maybe don't talk for 20 minutes on one question, because we have a lot to cover. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. But if you guys need to like dash at any point, that's okay. Definitely take some food. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start this question with, or the whole series, I guess, with Kelly, and ask, when we say affordable housing, this is like the biggest question, I'm so sorry. When we say affordable housing, what do we mean? And why does it seem so hard to access? If she answers this well, you guys can all go home at the end of it.
Okay, let's see if this is working.
Yeah, and definitely talk into it.
Talk into it?
Very
is
deep.
It's a little bit? A little bit working? Okay. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Right here? Is that good? So we know that Massachusetts is one of the least affordable states in the country for housing. And so what it means to be affordable for housing in Massachusetts is different than it is in most other states. Each year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, a nationwide advocacy group, puts out a report called Out of Reach, and they rank each state and the District of Columbia on housing affordability issues. And Massachusetts consistently ranks in the top 4 for least affordable states for renters. Usually we're number 3 in the country. This year we're number 4, so we're moving maybe in the right direction. But this year's report shows that for a family to afford a fair market rent 2-bedroom apartment in Massachusetts, they'd have to earn $45.90 per hour to afford that and pay for other basic expenses. So they break it out if you're looking for a 1-bedroom apartment or if you're making minimum wage. So we know in Massachusetts, the minimum wage is higher than it is in most regions of the country at $15 an hour. But you would still have to work 122 hours per week at minimum wage to afford a fair market rent apartment. And as we know from the work, and you may know from your own experiences, most apartments aren't listed at a fair market rate. Those are set, like, you know, if you look at the whole inventory of housing available for folks who may have been in their unit for a long time, their rent may be at market or below market, but newly listed apartments often are well above that fair market rent. So when we talk about affordability in Massachusetts, we know that it really is truly out of reach for most families and individuals because they're not earning $45.90 an hour, and they don't have multiple people earning, above minimum wage to be able to afford those units. And so what we're seeing is that in Massachusetts, that there is not only each apartment that's available is expensive, that we don't have enough units. The state has estimated that we need about 220,000, 230,000 new units to come online to be able to address the housing needs, but those units aren't going to come online fast enough. And it's unlikely that they'll be targeted to the lowest income families and individuals. So the families that we work with at the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, the individuals that we work with, they're often folks who are dealing with disabilities, health issues. They may have been experienced domestic violence. There's various paths to homelessness, but the common denominator is that they don't have enough money to be able to afford market rate housing, and the waiting lists for subsidized housing in Massachusetts are often very long. So Massachusetts is unique in terms of having a wide array of state-funded affordable housing opportunities, but they're not to scale. And so I think that we, as we have the conversation tonight, we'll talk about that there are a lot of pieces that we're on track in some ways, but they're just not to scale. So we have the ideas, we know the answers to this problem. It's not that it's something that we can't solve, but we have to have the political will to do it and to make the investments. And so, some of the key programs in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, it was an inspiration for the federal Section 8 program. We have state-funded public housing. We have public-private partnerships to create affordable units, but that we're not doing it at a rate that really can address housing instability and homelessness. And we've seen over the past few years, as there's been a brighter spotlight shown on homelessness issues, that we really do need to make those investments in housing if we're going to address our homelessness crisis. And so look forward to this discussion more, but to know that these keys where we do need to produce more units, but we also have to preserve the units that exist, and we need to come up with creative solutions to be able to make existing units affordable. So we know that there's the ballot question that looks like it's on track to be on the 2026 ballot for rent stabilization. But we need to have a wide array of tools and to use all of those levers possible to keep housing that exists affordable and to bring new units online, and not to forget the lowest income families and individuals, those who are at or below the 30% of area median income, as Katie talked about.
Awesome, thank you. I did not realize the MRVP has been around longer than Section 8, that's pretty cool. All right, so this next question is for Nicholas. Do you prefer Nick? Or do you have you do. I'll call you Nick. Nick, from your perspective, what are the main barriers that prevent people from getting or keeping affordable housing?
Yeah, so I think it's like, obvious. Sorry, is that better? All right. So it's obviously a multifaceted problem, and I think that it's different, but also kind of the same depending on what you mean by affordable housing. So in the housing justice space, there's this acronym, everything has an acronym, but it's NOAH, and that's naturally occurring affordable housing. So we have, as you mentioned, units that are maybe at or below market rent for various reasons, as well as subsidized and public housing and things like that. And some of the things that prevent our clients, and I should say that we don't do as much work helping folks find housing. We do a lot more work with folks trying to help folks keep their housing. But the barriers that people face with both sorts of affordable housing is mostly that they're scarce. There's just not enough of anything. There's not even enough market rate housing. And with respect to subsidized and affordable housing specifically, not only is there not enough of it, but the logistical complexity, as you heard in the story that started this event, is pretty extreme for a lot of the folks that we assist, who are on the lower end of median income, who are going through, in most cases, one of the worst moments of their life when they're facing eviction and homelessness, and who often suffer from medical disabilities, mental disabilities, things like that. Even if they qualify and they're the perfect case for someone who should have access to affordable housing, sometimes the burden required to advocate for themselves and to complete what's required by the various programs is sometimes too much, and it can be as simple as that. And that's why it's so important to advocate for people in this situation, because it can be as simple as someone qualifies for housing or can get housing and has every factor working for them, but they just can't get over the hurdle of doing all the steps that are required in the process to access it. And it's sort of the same thing on the other end when we're trying to help folks keep their affordable housing, which is a little bit more what we focus on in our practice. You have issues with logistical problems there, especially so. For example, when folks have trouble with their rental amount in subsidized housing. So as you heard, subsidized housing generally, the portion that the tenant pays is adjusted along with their income. And so part of that is keeping the entity that's in charge of regulating that rental portion informed of changes to the income and changes to the tenant's circumstances. And it can be a lot of work and a lot of paperwork and a lot of documentation when you're trying to support yourself and just getting by and support your family. A lot of folks fall behind and then get into trouble where now they're in court and they're facing eviction, and we're trying to stop that, put the brakes on that, and also offer the support that they need to get back on track and hopefully preserve access to their housing. So it's a huge problem. There's so many factors at issue that prevent people from accessing and keeping what little affordable housing does exist.
Awesome. Thank you very much. This one is for Rachel. Can you talk about what it looks like? Sorry, I wrote these down and I can't read can you talk about what that looks like for families coming through our doors, where they're coming from, what their situations look like when the housing options just don't exist?
Yes, and I think the answers that we got already touched on some of the things I wanted to mention, but we were trying to think about what does it look like in general? Who are we seeing knocking on our door, asking for help? And overarching, which is what everyone has said, is people cannot afford a market rate apartment on the wages because as things have gone up, cost of living has gone up, our wages have not gone up to meet it. So it would be fine if our apartments cost this much if people were also earning $30 an hour at Whole Foods when they work there hourly, but they're not. They're earning, $15, $17 an hour. So a single income household, which is a lot of what we see. We do have a lot of dual income, but a lot of times there's a parent taking care of young children, so they're not at work. Really, a single income cannot afford a house here. I think, and Kelly, you mentioned how much you would have to earn for 45. I did some Googling and it was like 50, but essentially it's like you have to have either 2 people or 3 people earning money to be able to pay for these apartments. And I do think that's something that's quite new compared to how much apartments used to be. Like even when I had my first apartment, like my first apartment was like $215 a month for my room, which I know is crazy, but it's like there are things that are changing faster than our income. So mainly it's a lot of people that just can't afford to live with the basics. So people ask us about budgeting. It's not something that we can fix with budgeting. But I think the other thing is that it's a lot of crises that are unexpected that do happen to any of us. Health issues. One story that comes up, because that sometimes helps, is just like we had a dad that came to us and he was the primary breadwinner for the family. He was a manager of a restaurant and had 2 or 3 small children that his wife was home with. And he had a serious health issue. He had to be in rehab for the health issue before he could safely return to work. And yes, there were state programs that he was able to access, but it didn't cover the amount of money. There's the RAFT program, which is great, but they've reduced the amount of money people can access per year. So he could only access $7,000. And after that point, he was not back to work well enough. And so he was facing eviction. And he was someone that worked like 50 hours a week and, was in a market rate apartment and was doing everything right. So we were able to work with other organizations in the town in a nice partnership to make sure that didn't happen and give him more time. But that's what we're seeing is like people are not earning enough money that they can have anything go wrong in their life, whether that is a layoff, or a lot of these jobs don't offer people 40 hours a week because they don't want to pay benefits. So they'll let them work 40 hours a week for 2 weeks, and then they'll give them only 12 hours. We see that a lot with these like constant dips in how much time people get. And then also we have a lot of people that come to us after a crisis, and maybe the crisis has been years ago, and they have an eviction on their record, and they have terrible rental history, and they cannot access housing anywhere. So that's something where the system has created a problem in the past, which is having a repercussion that's going on and on into the future. But I think what everyone is sort of saying here is just that we have created a system where people are not earning enough money to afford to live, and they cannot afford to have one tiny thing go wrong. And sometimes another thing that's gone wrong with multiple families I've seen this year is a child in the family has had a serious health issue. So the parent has to take time off work. And yes, if they have a job that lets them access FMLA, that's good, but it takes a long time to apply for these things. The barrier to applying is like, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing completely when I'm doing my own paperwork. So this type of paperwork is so intense, and then they're ending up earning or owing arrears before they can get the money. So I think we just need to think about, really, it's like wages are not matching the cost of living.
Thank you. And I do think, to Katie's point earlier, with affordable housing specifically, you can make too much to qualify for affordable housing, and it's still way too little to access any of the market rate units. All right, this question's for Anna. Can you walk us through what it looks like to rent to someone with a housing subsidy? What's involved and what surprises people about this process?
Renting to someone with a housing voucher or subsidy isn't too much different than renting to what we consider a market tenant, other than that there's a little bit of extra paperwork. There are steps you need to do when you're renting to anybody, and I think on the property management side, there can be the misconception that it's all this extra paperwork and hoops to jump through, but it's really just finding the person's case manager and then just doing that extra application. But it really, what housing is there to do is just to make sure that the landlord is doing all the proper steps, getting the proper documents in, everyone's on the same page, and you should be doing that anyway. Housing is just there to check and make sure that everyone is doing things by the book. So I think that's the process. Someone still applies, but you just have to take it that one extra step and apply with the housing. So it involves a little bit more people, but it's really not that. It's maybe an extra 20 minutes in your day.
This is why we like working with Anna, because I will say that not all landlords would have that answer. I think it feels like this big monster that is like really scary and extra work. But you guys have been awesome with working with these systems. I'll let Kelly or Nick fight over this one, but so whoever grabs the mic first. How do rental caps and voucher limits affect families' abilities to actually use the help that they're given?
I'll start. So a lot of the voucher programs, they cap how much, so even though the family or individual pays 30% of their income, but then there's a cap on how much that voucher is worth, and it may be up to 100% of the fair market rent or 110%. But like we were talking about earlier, a lot of the units that are available are much higher than that. So even though theoretically, the subsidy would pay for 30%, the person would only pay 30% of their income, then there would be a gap. And so the number of units that are actually available for that family or individual to rent is much smaller unless they can find some other way to make up that difference. And so like the math doesn't work in a lot of cases. And, we know that there aren't, there's housing discrimination against folks who are living in poverty or trying to use vouchers in many cases. And, not every landlord is like Anne. So, that's another issue that we're facing. But certainly the fact that there's also like micro and not even that micro, but like when they determine fair market rent, it's over 130 or something. Many cities and towns in Massachusetts, including New Hampshire down to Rhode Island. So it's like the markets aren't necessarily equal. So like I live in Somerville, and like the rents there are different than they are in Beverly, but also different than they are in Framingham. But we're all in the same area when we're considering what the fair market rent is. So I think that also makes a difference. And trying to, a lot of the work that we do, my colleagues are day after day, like helping people apply for all the affordable housing opportunities they may be eligible for, calling, checking to see where they are on the list, make sure, see if they have a priority status, because the market rate units aren't going to work based on, especially if somebody has a fixed income.
This next question is actually kind of redundant because you guys have touched on it. So I will skip to Rachel. And how would you say this plays out locally? Like, how long does it take for a family a family on our wait list to actually find housing?
So
give us the worst.
I know. I wrote year to years, but then the team was like years. Sadly, it's not what anyone wants to hear. I've met people that they were like my first client when I started here last January, and they're still homeless. Like, yes, they're living in a scatter site shelter, and we've had everyone in this room. I can point around to people that have helped on this case, but it's still not resolved. And that's because, what we do and what Kelly just mentioned, we try to see, like, have they applied for everything? Mainly, we're looking at the CHAMP, which is I wrote it down, Common Housing Application for Massachusetts Programs. But what that really is it's the application that you do to apply for state-aided public housing developments that are in towns and cities all over Massachusetts. And you can apply on one application online and pick every place that you might consider living. If you don't have a priority, you could be on that list for 10, 15 years, I don't know, so long that you might not exist. I don't know, it's really depressing. So we try to see, can people qualify for a priority, a homeless priority, if they are actually in fact homeless. But as I learned yesterday, you have to be homeless by certain standards. So it takes a lot of work to prove these certain reasons why you can be qualified for a homeless priority. And then once you get the homeless priority, which for a couple of our clients was taking like 6 months to do the application process, to have the reviews and the appeals, and to find all the documents, it's again, so much paperwork. It's really intimidating. Then you get called, you get popped to the top of the list for the cities that you've picked, and then you're screened again. So we have a client that was screened now that she got her homeless priority within a month of getting the homeless priority for a couple different towns, but every time she gets pulled into screening, it's not just her, it's her and 100 other people, her and 10 other people. And then you're applying almost like very similar to market rate. They're looking at a lot of different factors, and you're not sure why you're not getting that, that call. So hopefully it will happen for this one individual and her family, but it takes a very long time. So there, and then in our area, and I don't know if this is like a separate question, we do have, we're really lucky to have the YMCA providing affordable housing as a large landlord here, and then also Harbor Light Homes. So there are other options for people here, which is great. But the waiting lists there are extremely long because they do such a good job of retention and making sure that people can stay there, because they not only are paying the 30% of their income, they're helping them do the recalculations, they're preventing them from getting into a situation that is difficult. So unfortunately, because those wait lists don't move, it's hard to get our new clients on the wait list. But so I would say it's years, and it's really hard to accept because I feel bad every morning. So I'll be like, she's still not in a house.
This is why we don't want Rachel reading books about evictions after work. But and I want to add too, I think there's all sorts of types of affordable housing, right? So CHAMP is a good example of like what you kind of visualize when you think of affordable housing, like Section 8 wait lists. And Harbor Light Homes is a good example of when they build a new building, it's usually a lottery. And so we jump on those because you could get a family into housing a lot quicker through lotteries. What's really frustrating about affordable housing is there's a million definitions for it, and a lot of developers can kind of define their own affordable housing so they can create their own units and have their own process for getting folks in some cases. Katie's totally wrong. There are definitions, but there's definitions they have to meet, but in terms of accessing those units, they can create different process for accessing their own units if they want to. And so to be an advocate is to know about all of these different opportunities and to help families apply. The YMCA has a separate list. The Harbor Light Homes has a separate list. CHAMP is a separate list. They've combined some lists recently, which has been helpful, but it can be really complicated. Anna, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what subsidized housing looks like. Can you paint a picture of the types of units that you manage and how that might differ from what people imagine when they hear affordable housing?
The types of units that we manage they're pretty much market units. So anyone could rent this apartment. It's not specific for someone in housing. I think what a lot of people misunderstand is they think whether people are about to receive a voucher or people outside of the program, there's a list that comes out with what the rate is for a 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom, and that's the amount of rent you're going to get. And that's not true. It goes into more of the condition of the apartment, what's included, the utilities, the amenities, and then that will kind of set what actually is the rental rate for it. But the units that we manage anyone can rent them, and then their voucher will dictate how much rent they pay. And that voucher, though, and how much it will pay is based on comparable units in the area. So we can't just go out there and say, oh, we want $3,000 for this unit. Everyone else in the building is paying $2,000, but we want $3,000 because you have a voucher. You can't do that.
Thank you. Kelly, what myths or misconceptions about affordable housing do you encounter most often, especially in suburban communities like ours?
I would say in general, not necessarily here specifically, that some communities are more welcoming to the expansion of affordable housing opportunities, and other communities have been nervous about expanding opportunities. And so some of the myths that we've heard is a concern around bringing down property values, bringing in more low-income students into their school district, and not recognizing that low-income people exist in every community across Massachusetts, including the wealthiest communities. And there's often a perception like there's people coming from the outside and not recognizing, because family homelessness in particular and youth homelessness is often hidden. It's not visible, and that people are afraid to tell their stories, rightfully so, because of the consequences and the treatment oftentimes. But that's also been a barrier to people seeing that these are people that they already know. They're people in their community, and that if we're able, a home is so foundational for people being able to be happy and healthy and to thrive, and that by expanding those housing opportunities in our communities, we can retain and attract new people that are really critical to our communities. And so I think that the myth that there's a negative consequence to communities by expanding housing opportunities that are affordable to the lowest income people is something that we hear often.
Thank you. Nick, when discrimination or bias shows up in housing, whether subtle or overt, how does that play out legally?
Sure, yeah. So I think the short answer and the kind of depressing answer for most people is that usually it doesn't. Usually people face discrimination and they have the choice to go through the proper channels to challenge it and try and overcome it and right the wrong that was done to them for themselves and for future people who come along in the same circumstances. Or they can move on and look for another opportunity for housing. And when you're dealing with someone who is on the verge of homelessness, facing eviction, or already homeless, it's not something that they have frankly, the time, resources, knowledge to go about defending themselves and their community against. It's a different story when someone is in litigation over their housing, because discrimination is much easier to raise in a housing case. It can be raised, but that's in a situation where someone is already housed and is facing the prospect of losing that housing, and they've been subject to discrimination of some kind while living there. But for people specifically who are looking for housing, usually I think realistically it doesn't play out legally. There is a process for that in Massachusetts. They go to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, and the MCAD will investigate and make a determination about what should be done. That is a long process. That is a process that usually that most folks need the assistance of counsel to do. And of course, someone who is homeless and looking for a home for their family usually doesn't have access to legal counsel and or the time or resources to go through that whole process to right the injustice that was done to them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It's not great, it's awful, but that was a great answer. There's going to be a lot of that. We have to deflect with humor because that's just how we survive. So I don't know about you guys, but that's how I navigate this. This one's for Rachel. What misconceptions do families face when they're searching for housing with vouchers or assistance?
Yes, I, again, would echo sort of what Nick just said, is that, when someone applies for an apartment and the landlord finds out that they have a voucher, I'm thinking it could be either a mobile voucher or it could be we have another short-term voucher we have access to called TBRA or something like this. I think a lot of landlords know that they're not going to say out loud that that's the reason that you did not get the apartment. They can just say they had another better candidate. We have such a housing crunch that I'm sure they're getting 10, 12 applications maybe for an apartment, and they can just say that they went with someone else. So there's really not a lot of recourse or pushback that someone can have, and I have heard that a lot, which is really difficult for people that are searching that do have a voucher. I mean, right now they're not even issuing vouchers, so people that have a voucher, they know how precious it is, because once you lose it, you cannot get it back. It's not going to be sent back out into, the circulation. So that's why we really value relationships with landlords where we know that they're being treated just like any other applicant. I think we need more landlords that are willing to not just say they're going to do that, but act that way. And so we really do appreciate those partnerships we have with Goldberg Properties, and then there are landlords, sometimes a smaller landlord, we've had a couple instances of success because they just have 1 or 2 units. And if you talk to them and we've gone in and sat down to literally explain what the voucher means and how they will be paid, because also it could be that they really need that income. They're not a large property management company that has multiple portfolios. It's just one person. So, it's really hard. The searching is very difficult for people. And I think that's something that people don't realize when they have never had to experience searching with a voucher. Also, this is not to say that people are coming from far away, but I've had multiple clients when I was at my past job and only recently coming from Maine and Vermont, because there's such a crunch there that they have a voucher, which is a precious thing, and they cannot find an apartment because there's just nothing. So I think it's, again, what we were saying, just maybe it's discrimination or maybe it's competition. It's hard to pin it down.
You're saying they're coming from Maine and Vermont or going to?
No, looking for housing here from Maine and Vermont.
Yeah. It's happening all over. This next question is also for you, so you can hang on to that mic. I want to talk a little bit about the human impact, what happens to the families that we serve through all of this. When a family loses housing, what happens next? What are the ripple effects you see for parents and children?
I know you said I read a lot of books, but I would plug one book, which is There Is No Place for Us by Brian Goldstone, and he's writing about the current crisis of homelessness, the invisible crisis of working parents that are homeless. And in his book, he calls it toxic stress. So I think that's the overarching thing. Like, it's going to affect everyone in the household. For kids, a lot of the children that we come in contact with or get to know over time, we hear later that they're suffering from different types of anxiety and depression. They have a lot of trouble if you end up having, what we see a lot is, we do have in the summer families living in their cars, but in the wintertime, a lot of the time they're couch surfing. So they're going from a family member to a friend, and the child doesn't know where they're going to be. And anybody that is growing up and living in a situation where they don't know where they are, they don't have the stability to have a brain that can learn at school, a brain that can emotionally regulate. So we see a lot of parents telling us about the different struggles that their children have, which is really hard to see. And the parents are doing all they can to turn their situations around and advocate for themselves, but the stress the parent is under is also really significant. So it's impacting their job. So students, because of the McKinney-Vento Act, did I say that right? The law says that they can go to the school in which they lost their housing. But that might mean that if they're in a shelter in a different state or staying somewhere else, they're going to be bused. So they're coming to school maybe an hour in the car in the morning, and you'll see taxis dropping off at the schools in the morning, and that's what that is. And then, the kids, when this happens to them, they end up not attending school because they're, maybe don't know where they're living, and then they get back into school. But anytime a child doesn't go to school for a couple of days, that just leads to more lack of attendance, which is really not great for them in general. So I feel like the impact of not having that stability is immeasurable, and also just has different ramifications along the way. And furthermore, I've had two parents that were working, and because the shelter moved them when they were homeless, they had to stop working. So often people are losing their job because they cannot get to their job anymore because they've lost the location that they were in. Say they were working at a Dunkin' Donuts in this town, and then they're moving 45 minutes and they have to get their kid to school 20 minutes here. So it just becomes sort of insurmountable. And then if you're asking people to also do all this paperwork at the same time, it's really a hard combination of things that people are supposed to be able to address at the same lowest moment of their possibly life.
Thank you. And I'm going to actually switch the order for a second and go to Anna, because from your perspective, your housing, you've housed for us a handful of families that have come from very unstable situations into all of a sudden getting apartments. Can you speak a little bit about what stable housing, the impact stable housing has on a tenant or a family?
Sure. The tenants that we've had, especially that have come through a program like yourselves or anyone we have on housing, is happy to have their voucher and happy to have a place to live. So for a landlord, you want a good tenant more than anything. So when people feel comfortable and they feel safe, and they'll take care of the property, they'll take care of their environment, they're nice to the building that they're in, they work well with you, they communicate, you actually kind of get to know them a little bit less because they are stable and they're secure, and you want to keep those tenants for a long time and they want to stay. So it's really the word that keeps coming up is stable, and that is the word.
Yeah, so not hearing from a tenant is probably a good thing, and I agree. I think we see that a lot. Yeah, they don't want to lose that apartment, so you shouldn't interact with them very, very much.
We do like it when they tell us if there's something wrong, but that just shows that they're comfortable and they like their environment that they're in.
Awesome. So. And Kelly, from a bigger system, how would the housing crisis show up in other systems like schools, healthcare, or just the general economy?
Yeah, I think really building on what Rachel was talking about, that we're seeing that statewide, where when a family or individual is experiencing housing instability, we're seeing the negative repercussions in school attendance and ability to achieve in school, the worsening of health conditions or triggering new health conditions to emerge, and people not being able to either access jobs or retain jobs. And in our work, we have advocates that initially were on site at community health centers in different parts of the state, and as well as in public schools working with families. And now we work with accountable care organizations with patients participating in the Mass Health program to help them apply for affordable housing, to do tenant-landlord mediation, to apply for food assistance, and to navigate various resources. Because in those settings, we've seen, those settings, they see folks who are experiencing instability and how it's worsening the outcomes for them in those spheres of education, healthcare, as well as in employment. And as a state, we are suffering. So it's not just the families and individuals who are directly impacted, but that all of us as communities, as a state are, and that we really need to take that seriously. Not, like a lot of times we'll pitch it, like from a moral perspective, we need to address the affordable housing crisis and address homelessness. But even if you don't care about the moral issues, that as for a community to grow and to continue to thrive, that we need to make sure that these basic building blocks are in place, and that right now that there is a lot that we're doing right, but we need to build on that and bring that to scale.
Thank you. And Nick, when you're advocating for families or individuals in crisis, what moments have shown you what's at stake if these systems don't change?
So the cop-out answer would be every minute that I spend in the housing court. But more specifically than that, part of what we do is as you mentioned, we assist folks in court day of through Lawyer for the Day. We do also take cases at a broader scope where we're assisting the client throughout or through part of their litigation process in housing court. But also a thing that we do is we help folks who are right on the cusp of homelessness when they are about to be evicted. And we have a whole separate procedure for folks to come in to us that way. And part of what we do in that in those cases is we try and negotiate a resolution short of making the person homeless with the landlord, with the court if necessary. But part of what happens in those cases is they can't all be successful. And we do have folks who are in just impossible situations. And part of what we do in those situations is advise them like what comes next and how to be ready to be physically removed from their home and have the door locked behind them. So that is, that's an incredibly difficult part of the job. And so that really illustrates what's at stake. I guess a more specific example, though not specific, of course, that is a little bit more hopeful. I know Rachel mentioned earlier CHAMP's priority housing. We had a client who was at the time undergoing treatment for a kind of cancer, was going through chemotherapy, and lost her housing during that process and was homeless, couch surfing in her community while severely immunocompromised from the treatment that she was going through. And this person had applied for priority status to get access to public housing based on her medical condition, and was denied, and then appealed, was denied again, came to us. We appealed to the state agency that oversees that process, and we assisted at a hearing. The state determined that the local office that had issued the denial was incorrect in doing so, ordered them to change or to reconsider the decision, which they did, and it was denied again. In a way that was inconsistent with what the state said. So we spent probably 6 months trying to get the state to take action, which they eventually did. And this client was eventually granted medical priority for public housing, and is pretty close to finally being housed and still undergoing intensive medical treatment. So, and it's an example of someone who did all the right things, advocated for themselves, but just didn't have what was necessary to go through this process. Because even when we were going through the process, it was still an uphill battle. And we're a law office who specializes in this kind of work. So that's a little bit more hopeful of a story than the other one. But
It did end positively, I'll give you that. I think that was actually a really good illustration too of what we do at Family Promise, what NLA does, that people are often confused about the work that we do. And the reality is these stories that everyone is sharing, it's so complicated. I get stressed out when I have to call my health insurance company, and when they say, sorry, your insurance meant to deny that, I'm like, okay, that's fine, I'll pay the money. It's really hard to then fight and fight and fight and fight, and especially if you don't know whether or not you're correct in if you deserve this housing or not. So I think that was a really good illustration of like what our jobs are, is just pushing and pushing. A lot of people at the state don't really like to see our emails coming, and I'm sure many people on this panel have that same experience, because we basically are just a pain in the side of folks that make the decisions. On the topic of hope, we'll see how hopeful the answers to these questions can be, but the point of the questions is to hopefully get some concrete action items out of this. So we'll start with Kelly. Kelly is also just a great resource for ways to get involved and actually take action. The Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless is constantly doing things that are just very tangible. Sometimes it's just signing your name onto something. Sometimes it's just spreading the word. So we'll start with Kelly. What is actually working right now in Massachusetts? Policies, programs, or coalitions that give you hope?
Yeah, so I would say definitely have hope for the future, in particular because over the past few years, more people have been mobilized to look at the issues of housing instability and homelessness. On the family side, over the past 2 years, the state imposed many new restrictions on access to shelter, and there was an assumption before that if you were a family experiencing homelessness, that you would get access to shelter, and that never was true, but it became much more untrue over the past few years. And we've been able to connect with folks working on immigrant justice issues, working people from various faith communities, people who are interested in the health consequences of homelessness, and people working in the housing field, people from schools who are seeing the crisis play out because families were no longer able to access shelter. And so while the work continues and we need to expand access to shelter, expand access to housing, increase opportunities to prevent homelessness, that there is more general awareness around that the current program and restrictions don't work, and that putting that pressure on elected officials here in Massachusetts as well as at the federal level to make changes. I think, like you're saying, sometimes state officials don't necessarily want to see us in their inbox or on their phone or in their face, as lovely as we might be, but that having more people who are the unusual suspects, that they're hearing from a broad range of people who are tuned in, I think it does make a difference, because they're like, okay, well, if it's just, the four of us maybe weighing in, like they could ignore it. But when they're hearing from their constituents, and that, you don't have to know all the details about the policies, but to say that this is something you care about, like it puts them on notice. And for legislators and elected officials who want to do the right thing, to say that I'm taking these actions because I have the support from my community is also important. So I think, to name it, that right now what's going on at the federal level, more people are mobilized and trying to make sure that we secure state resources and fill in those gaps. So we saw, for example, this past month when the Trump administration was refusing to go into the reserve funds to be able to fully fund food assistance through the SNAP program, that communities across Massachusetts came together to figure out ways to make sure people were fed, and that the State Department of Transitional Assistance was issuing communications every day to make sure that participants in the program and community partners knew what was going on, and that they were working around the clock to make sure that as soon as funds were available, that they could release them. And I think that also, that sense that we're all working on the same team also gives me hope.
Good, that is helpful. Nick, if you could change one policy tomorrow to make a tangible difference, what would it be? Sorry, that probably is the hardest question on this list.
What a question, yeah. So I feel like it's so difficult to name one policy because I do feel like we're in such a crisis that we need an all of the above type of solution. But that's not a fun answer. So I will name one thing, and I guess this may not be a policy so much as it's something that has come up earlier in our discussion, and that's like in specifically with respect to affordable housing. I think that there is still a lot of work to be done in making it more accessible. And by accessible, I don't mean available to people. Of course, that's the main issue. But I mean, by that, I mean making the process of getting and keeping and maintaining your affordable housing accessible for people with disabilities, with limited English proficiency and things like that, because there are these steps that have to be taken. Your income needs to be recertified, et cetera. And I think that we see it a lot where, people are doing all the right things. They're trying to make it work, but they didn't get the letter telling them that they were out of compliance in their native language. And so they took no action. And now they come to us and they're behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And then we're trying to sort of fix a situation that has already deteriorated more than it should have, because had the process been accessible to them in their language or had been done in consideration of what disabilities they may have had, it would have never gotten here, because they haven't done anything wrong, and other than not making the process more accessible, the landlord or the housing authority hasn't done anything wrong. It's just wires get crossed and there's a miscommunication, but when we're talking about keeping a family housed, that's not the sort of thing that can be afforded.
Thank you, that was good. Anna, this one is interesting because I do feel like we've alluded to the fact that not all landlords are created equal, or have the same perspective, I guess, on approaching housing. So I am curious, what would you say could make it easier or more appealing for landlords to participate in affordable housing programs?
Groups like yours, honestly, it can be daunting, even if you have the training and the knowledge about affordable housing, to suddenly have that applicant, and you need to know and make sure that you do all the right steps from a legal perspective and just from a social perspective. It can be a little challenging until you get the hang of it. So as it is with a lot of things, it can depend on who you get on the phone. And so if you happen to get someone great at one of the housing agencies to help you out and understand it, that's good. But groups like Family Promise and others that we've worked with, they really come through and they advocate for the person, and they help the person who's applying go through the process of housing too. And that's a lot of just bridging the gap, because it can be daunting. The horror stories are always out there. Those are the stories everybody remembers. So when you introduced yourselves, and working with you has been great, because it kind of opens the doors a little bit more, and it helps create relationships between us from the landlord with these different housing agencies. So when we go up for inspections or renewals or just any even like tenant issues, we already have the relationship there built. And so it doesn't feel like you're dealing with this whole mess of confusion and liability. So
Thank you. And I did not tell her to say that, so that was very sweet. And then, Rachel, from your perspective, what kinds of support or flexibility help families succeed once they finally do get housing?
Yeah, actually, I think it's kind of what Nick and Anna were saying, is as close to the person in the family case management as possible, I think, is one of the things we're sort of noting here. What we do when we have a tenant in a Goldberg property is that we help them get in, and we help them with their paperwork. And if they have a medical problem during the year and they have trouble with their rent, we figure out different resources that we can access to help smooth over these processes and prevent things from happening. And I think the most successful housing developments in our area also share that model. Like Harbor Light has on-site case management, and YMCA, to a certain degree, also has on-site case management for people inside the building that helps them do the recalculations. It helps them if they have an issue. It like prevents things from getting worse and snowballing. And I think that like as anyone is alive, like things happen, and if you have no one to help you, sometimes you can go down the wrong path, and it can be really a terrible, set of situations where you have no recourse to get back on track. So I think if we can create more systems where there is help for people and help with this amount of paperwork that it can be, which is like a nightmare. So part of the reason we like working with Anna in the office is like we now have done the same process like 10 times, and like we know what we're already asking for, what we're asking for, and we have like, the right telephone numbers, the right inspector person, like this whole process can be smoothed over. And then I think also, honestly, it's like money. Locally, there are a lot of great organizations that we partner with that provide financial assistance. I can name some of them, but it's like Bootstraps does it, Beverly Female Charitable, Fisher and Fuel, like multiple different funds where and I think every town should have this, where if someone has an emergency, there's somewhere they can go to just get that help. Because the amount of money is, sometimes it's only $500, and that saves people from eviction. It saves them from losing their car or whatever it is. And I think having a quick ability to help people when they have stumbled or something unexpected happens is really essential, because sometimes we sometimes go into the story of what happened to people, and we want to figure out the whole breadth of what went on, and you'll get down to like one thing that happened 3 years ago when their car broke the same week that they lost their part-time evening job. And it's like, if only someone had helped them then, this wouldn't have happened. So I think sometimes I think about, I'm not that good at policy or overarching things, but like what we could do now in town is to make sure we have quick, easy access to like help people a little bit up front. And then, there's lots of other policy things that we could do, but.
And I know for like us, and I'm sure it's the same with Bootstraps and other organizations, like what we can offer in financial assistance is dependent on how much money we have, and that's dependent on our donations. And I think just from working with so many of these other funders, it's the same. And we try really hard to kind of like get money from a bunch of different sources so that not all agencies are getting depleted immediately, and it's somewhat successful, but it's really difficult, and everyone is struggling right now in that department. So this last question, anyone can take it. You don't all have to answer it, but it is the last question, and then I will open it up for questions if folks have things they want to ask, but we are close to time, so I don't want to take too many questions. But if everyone in this room could do one thing after tonight to make a difference, whether as a voter, a landlord, a neighbor, or an advocate, what would you want that to be? And obviously you might all have different answers, so if you do all want to try to answer it, you can, but you don't have to.
I think simple gatherings like this, the more the community gets together and talks about any issue, and we just all grow from each other. So I know it's a vague answer, but that's usually where the best ideas start. It's just with people getting together and trying to find a reasonable solution or try to make something better.
We definitely always encourage folks to reach out to their elected officials. It's important to be educated and be in community with one another, but reaching out to state rep, state senator, to the governor's office really is invaluable, because sometimes in talking to reps, they're like, we heard from 5 people in our community and then they voted the right way, or they filed a bill. Sometimes it takes a lot more than 5 people, but like sometimes it's just mind blowing that it could be just a few people, but they haven't, they hadn't heard about the issue and now they're on board. We had a campaign where we were working to get the state to create a system to address homelessness among young people. And we were initially hearing from legislators like, well, that doesn't happen in my district, that's sad. It was like, okay, well, you're not hearing from 16 and 17-year-olds because there aren't systems in place, and they're afraid that, if they come forward, what the consequences will be. And so as we brought young people to share their story and to talk to legislators, they're like, oh, now I see it. Like, I didn't know this was happening in my community. And so even if it's not your own personal experience, just sharing this is something that you want the state to focus on, that this is what you want your community to focus on, really does make a difference. And even if the state, there's always the response, like, we don't have enough money right now. And in some cases that's true, but Massachusetts has a almost $9 billion rainy day fund, and we know that it's raining for folks who need housing stability and are experiencing homelessness, and that we can shift resources. It's a matter of prioritization, and so as much as you can, keep weighing in with elected officials to make sure that they're, making the investments, but also some of them, it's not even about money. So just quickly to say, like, a campaign that we've worked on that maybe will pass this year is a bill that would get free Massachusetts identification cards to people experiencing homelessness. So waive that $25 fee and make it easier for folks to prove they're a Massachusetts resident if they're connected to services, to have that organization or state agency corroborate what the person is saying. And other states, about 16 other states have already done this. We're just like way behind the times, but it would be something that would be so minimal in terms of cost, but that would open the door. If people have an ID, they're able to apply for a job, get a library card, pick up a prescription, apply for housing, on and on. And so it's passed the state Senate 4 times. It's gotten stuck in the House. We think this might be the year, but something like that where it really isn't about money, and it's just trying to convince the legislature to do the right thing. So we have lots of opportunities at the coalition to be involved, and kind of give you the scripts and the tools that you need to be able to make those calls. Or if you're interested in doing meetings with legislators one-on-one or on Zoom or at the State House, would love to be a resource for that.
And I'll take this opportunity to plug that you can actually subscribe to Kelly's newsletter, where she basically makes everyone aware of all of the things that you can do on a weekly, monthly basis. So, and it's very informative. Does anyone else want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I'll just echo everything that everyone already said. Those are all great points, and I think just doing like we said before, like all of the above. Be informed about what's going on, what issues are in the legislature, what issues are facing members of our communities. Because when we started tonight, there was we talked about the invisibility and the lack of visibility for people experiencing homelessness and facing homelessness. So I think just doing everything in our power to stay aware of what's going on around us in our communities, and to be aware of what efforts are ongoing to try and make things better to the extent that that's possible. I think that's valuable.
I would say you can ask Rachel for book recommendations, because she usually has them. All right, if anyone has any questions, we'll take a couple and then we'll close out, and you can all take extra cheese and crackers and cookies home. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, I'm gonna bring you the mic because it's being recorded, and then the camera can hear your question.
Hi, my question is, what's the role of the city in all of this? You're all private organizations working on this. What is the city doing?
Does anyone want to tackle that? I can always do it, but I'm gonna. I think the cities in general have different responsibilities around this, and we constantly hear of aides from the cities getting calls from the constituents that are in need, and they refer them to us, or they themselves are trying. We've worked with city officials at length on cases because they've taken on a client and we might not have openings in our caseload. So from like a constituent standpoint, they're definitely working with the same people that we are. They're hearing from them very consistently. I think cities in general, it varies, right? Like we're in Beverly. We have a pretty good relationship with the city when it comes to, I think Beverly really, we're really lucky to have Harbor Light Homes here. I don't think Harbor Light Homes could be as successful as they are if it weren't for the city being supportive of their buildings. Not all cities have that. It's much harder to build large affordable housing units in certain towns that we won't name, but I think you'll see that pretty frequently. So it varies from city to city, but I think in general, they do hold a lot of power when it comes to building more affordable units, or at least pushing to have those affordable units built, right? So the state will often create these rulings and say, cities have to do X, Y, Z, but there's still a lot that is left up to each city to kind of how they implement that. I have my brother lives out in Wayland, Mass, and there was years ago, they created a rule around affordable units, and Wayland really didn't want to build affordable units, and then they ended up putting them very close to, I think it was like the dump or something. And so the cities can make these choices based on, they're given these rulings, and they still have a lot of choice in the matter. So I think every city's different. I think we're pretty lucky here in Beverly, but obviously we work with clients all across the North Shore, and not all cities are the same. Does anyone want to add to that, or? Okay. Another question. Here, I'm gonna go here first, Doug.
Hi, I'm Ken Clausen. I'm the Assistant Planning Director for the city, so I can address that question a little bit more. We do have an inclusionary housing in our zoning ordinance that states that every new project that has more than 6 units has to have 12% of those units constructed for families making 60% of the area median income. When we talk about area median income, we're talking about the Boston, Quincy, HUD district. So I think it was mentioned a few times earlier tonight that encompasses most of Eastern Boston, or most of Eastern or Western, or where are we? Eastern Mass, with Boston included. So that number is a lot higher than what the median income for a city like Beverly would be, because it's lumped into a federal program from HUD. One of the questions tonight was, if you could change one thing, what would that be? That would be my thing. I would love to be able to get rid of how AMI is calculated based from HUD standards, but it's a federal program that's very unlikely to happen. Other things that we do have an upcoming public hearing for a community development block grant that we're hopefully going to be receiving to address some certain things like I can't get into specifics yet because it hasn't been really announced, but that's upcoming, I think, in January. Any other questions, you can come to the planning department and talk to me about it.
Thank you, that was very helpful. And then Doug had his hand up.
So I was curious in the beginning, because you seem to all have talked a lot about the lack of affordable housing. And so I don't completely understand why the coalition would be for what you called the rent stabilization bill, because in places where some of the case studies I'm familiar with where they've put rent controls in place, it tends to contract the supply. So how does your organization think about that?
Yeah, so we're supportive of both the ballot initiative, which would be statewide, as well as legislation that's pending that would allow cities and towns to opt in to rent stabilization. So as I mentioned, I live in Somerville, and Somerville and cities like Boston have been working to overcome that statewide ban. And so it wouldn't be the rent control that was in the past. It would be, depending, the ballot question is different than the bills that are pending in the legislature now, but looking at capping how high rents could go, so like no more than 5%, or looking at what the rate of inflation is. And we're seeing now that in other communities that do have forms of rent stabilization, there's mixed information of what's coming out, but many studies have shown that it hasn't depressed the number of units. So there's other factors that's doing that, but we're seeing right now that there's no limit on how rents, how high they can go, and that many people are just being forced out of their communities. And there's no community in Massachusetts now where someone working at minimum wage can afford a market rate unit. Like that doesn't exist in Massachusetts. And so while the state is looking to increase the number of units through the Affordable Homes Act that was passed last year, that people need relief now. And so combining all of the tools that are possible. So putting some limits, but the legislation, for example, the ballot question would limit if it's owner-occupied units, if they're new construction for a certain number of years. So it's not just a blanket ban on increasing rents, but it's being strategic around making sure that we're not just looking at housing as something to make money off of, but that it really is a human right. So that's the perspective that we're coming from, but also trying to learn from why rent control in the communities that had it went away in the 90s and before, and learn from that and tweak it so that it's something that matches current conditions.
We'll take one more question, and then if folks want to stay and chat, they definitely can, unless you have to drive back to Somerville, in which case. Any other questions? Arnie.
Hi, Anna. I was curious, why Goldberg Properties, places folks that have vouchers, what's the consideration there? Are landlords obligated to consider people that have vouchers or Section 8? Like, how does that work?
Yes, so for housing, you have to accept someone with a voucher. You can't deny them housing just because they have a voucher. So, and we also have always had a really good relationship with Beverly Housing Authority too, to the extent that if we have a unit coming up, we'll reach out to them to see if they have any tenants for it, which helps. But yeah, if someone comes in with a voucher, you can't just deny them because they have a voucher. You actually have to go through the whole process. So to us, it's kind of just the same as any other applicant. And that's how we look at it.
Okay, I did write some closing words. Normally I wing it, but I chose not to this time. So thank you to everyone who joined us this evening to learn about the obstacles folks are facing all over Massachusetts when trying to access housing. We hope that you were able to take away from this conversation that when we say housing is a human right, which you just said, and I appreciated that, it's because right now it isn't. We believe it should be, and we believe everyone should be able to afford and access safe and stable housing. In our current society, especially in certain climates, human beings literally cannot survive without housing. At Family Promise, we spend every week helping families navigate systems that often feel intentionally complex. Housing should not be this hard to access, but it is. And it's this hard because there simply isn't enough of it. When a resource is scarce, a triage system emerges. But when that scarce resource is housing, the consequences are devastating. If you are triaged out of eligibility or access, you are homeless. What we see every day is a system so focused on gatekeeping that thousands of families are excluded long before they ever had a chance. Without organizations like ours or NLA writing appeal letters, attending housing court, challenging agencies, and advocating every step of the way, most families would never make it through the maze. Accessing housing should not feel like a game that only a few people get to win, yet that's exactly what it has become. Our hope is that you leave tonight with something that sticks with you, something you will talk about, share, and act on. We need more people who are curious, informed, and intentional about changing this landscape. We need your voices to push for policy change, for more housing, and for systems that make access easier, not harder. If you're interested in continuing this conversation or getting involved, please don't hesitate to reach out to our staff or any of tonight's panelists. Sorry, guys, but I did give you all their name and information, so you can reach out to them. But I lost my train of thought. But ultimately, this is, I think, a big community issue, and we are relying on all of you to take this with you. I'm very pleased with the showing. We had no idea how many folks are going to come out. This is our first time doing this, and as an agency, we're going into 2026 more intentionally trying to kind of have these types of conversations. So if you learned something tonight, you enjoyed it, we will be doing more panels in 2026. We encourage you to invite more folks to come with you. We just hope to kind of just educate people so they can really know what's going on. I think you guys did an amazing job illustrating really concrete examples of what you're seeing and why it is the way it is. So thank you. We couldn't have picked a better panel. And I just, again, I want to thank SCC for being so supportive of us and letting us host here. I want to thank the committee that helped plan this, that came up with all of these questions. Hopefully it covered the topic the way you were hoping. But again, if you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us, and we're happy to talk through some specifics. So thank you so much.